So let me start. So critical appraisal of any article means basically you are not taking a particular paper on its face value. You are trying to determine what is the worthiness of that paper. So that is what critical appraisal means. And to begin with, this is my disclosure slide. I have no conflicts of interest, but the previous speaker, Senthil, spoke about conflict of interest, and this is very important for anybody who is, critically appraising a paper, about trying to understand who wrote this paper and what is their conflict of interest. Usually it is disclosed. So like, for example, if somebody is presenting on or publishing on total disc replacements and they own royalties or have stakes in those companies, that person has a major conflict of interest. So any critical appraisal should take into that account. And now any foreign conferences, at least you will see most researchers and scientists will have this as their first slide. That's the conflict of interest slide. So any EBM process will have these steps. Senthil has already done the first two, which is ask and acquire the information or the evidence. And then what I'm talking about is the appraisal of the evidence. So the critical appraisal means determining validity of the study. Basically that means how close this is to truth or the trustworthiness of that paper, and how can you apply that evidence to your practice, the clinical applicability of that particular information. So I'm going to use the GATE frame. Now GATE is a short form for graphic approach to epidemiology, and this is not my idea. This is available free of charge on this website, and this is developed by Professor Rod Jackson from University of Auckland, and basically he's my teacher for epidemiology. I have never met him, but there's so much information on this website about critical appraisal and the way to do it, and it's extremely easy to understand. So I'm going to plug him this whole talk, and then if some of you at least go to this website and get information out of it, that this talk would be successful. So he starts it with this particular diagram, and that's the PCOT. It's the same as PICO, where P stands for participants, E is the exposure group, or you can call it the intervention group, that's the I or E. C is the comparison group or the control, O is the outcome, and T is the time. So any epidemiological study can be hung on this particular frame, and Professor Jackson actually has offered a kind of a prize if somebody comes up with an article that cannot be put up on this particular frame. So, okay, so that's the PCOT. So for example, this is a study by Dr. Rajshekharan. It's published in Spine in 2013. Participants are patients who had spine surgery. This is a randomized trial. The exposure group or the intervention group had local vancomycin in the wound plus IV antibiotic. Control group had only IV antibiotic. And the outcome they were measuring was surgical site infection rates. So that is a frequency table, a 2x2 contingency table, yes or no, over a time period of 12 weeks. So that is the T. So any particular research question can also be framed in this particular manner. So then when it comes to appraisal, there is a mnemonic called Rambo Man, and it's easy to remember these particular letters. So first is, and we'll go each one, first is recruitment, R, A is allocation, M is maintenance, B is blinding, O is objective measurement, and AN, the last one, is analysis. So let's start with recruitment. So recruitment means who are these findings of this study applicable to. So it starts with the study setting. Where was this study done, over what period, and what was the situation? Then out of those study settings, there will be a certain group of patients which will be eligible patients. That means inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. What were they? That makes that patient eligible or not. Out of those eligible patients, there will be a further subset who would be participants, because not all eligible patients would agree to be part of the study. Some people will refuse. So that is the participants. So the question you need to ask at this particular point is whether the participants are representative of that target population. And the reason why we are doing this Rambo man basically is to find out areas where there could be a systematic bias, right? This is the whole appraisal is about finding a bias in this particular study. So if the participants are not representative of the study population, or they have been selected in a certain way which has a particular characteristic, then you cannot extrapolate the study findings to the general population, correct? So that is the importance of recruitment. Second is allocation, that's the A in the Rambo man. So the participants can be randomized, so that is one way of doing studies. So when you do randomization, you need to look at two things in the paper. How was the random sequence generated? Now there are different ways it can be done. If you see papers that have written randomization using date of births or alternate odd and even numbers or hospital numbers, these are not good methods of randomization. These are quasi-randomization methods because you can expect, probably guess what this person would be randomized into. So a computer generated sequence or something like that which gives an equal probability of that patient to be in either group is the correct way of randomization. After the randomization, it has to be concealed. So what does concealed allocation means? It means that the person who is going to intervene does not know till the last moment what this person, in which group he is allocated to. For example, if I am doing a study on bone graft substitutes for a spine fusion, and I know beforehand that this particular patient is randomized into a X group which requires a bone graft substitute, and I think he's not the right patient for him, I might hesitate. I might try to convince the patient otherwise. The patient might, say that let me make up my mind before I want to be enrolled. So it adds bias, right? If you have if the allocation is revealed to the person who is going to intervene. So that is called concealed allocation. So randomization should have a concealed allocation. In cohort studies, basically one of the examples was presented before. The most important thing is how was the cohort selected? If it was measured, was it measured accurately? So if you are selecting a cohort of diabetics versus non-diabetics, how did you measure that diabetes? That is important. And then once you have these two groups, the EG means the exposure group or the intervention group. Let's call it EG because that's what Rod Jackson, in the GATE calls it as, and it's very easy to understand, EG versus CG. Now, is EG and CG similar at baseline? That's your question. And if you have randomized the group properly, then obviously they are going to be similar at baseline. And if there are baseline differences, has adjustment been made? The third point is maintenance, which is the M. Did the participants remain in the allocated group? So in maintenance, you have 2 points which you want to remember. One is completeness of follow-up and compliance. So let's look at first completeness of follow-up. You want as less follow-up as possible. That means each group should have less than 20% patients lost to follow-up. Then it makes sense, because if you have a surgery group where there is a lot of loss to follow-up, you don't know what has happened to the patients who are lost. They may have worse outcome, may have gone somewhere else, they are not happy with your care, so you don't know. So loss of follow-up should be kept minimum. Usually it should be less than 20%. There should be similar rate of follow-up, loss of follow-up in both groups. You can't have, very different rates. And the follow-up duration has to be meaningful. It has to make sense. If you are studying fusion rates, then your follow-up duration cannot be 6 months, right? Or maybe 3 months. You have to have a very meaningful follow-up duration. Now coming to the second point in maintenance, that is compliance. Now if you have 100 patients that you have randomized into surgery versus conservative treatment, then ideally at the end of study, the patients who are in the surgery group should stay in the surgery group, whereas the patients who are in the conservative group should stay in the conservative group, right? But this does not happen in real life. In real life, you are going to have some patients who are assigned to the surgery group, move to the non-operative side, and there are some patients who are assigned to the non-operative group, move to the surgery side. So this is called as crossover. So you also want to look at how many patients did that in that particular randomized study. The next is B, which is blinding, and this everybody knows. It is to prevent biased assessment of outcomes. If as an assessor, if I know what has happened to the patient, I might see the patient differently, or if the patient knows that he has taken treatment, this particular treatment, he might assess himself differently versus somebody who has not taken the treatment. So there is different levels of blinding, single blinding versus double blinding, and it is very extremely difficult in surgical trials which are randomized to do blinding. It's practically not possible, right? If you are comparing surgery versus no surgery. Then objective assessment, that's the OM. So now were outcomes objectively measured and were validated measurement tools used. Like example, ODOMS criteria, where the surgeon assesses excellent outcome, good outcome, fair outcome, poor outcome. So this is very subjective. It is not validated. You can't really reproduce that particular score. Versus an Oswestry disability score, it is it is a validated outcome score. Now, some of you will see ODI scores presented in spine conferences. You know, these are patient-based questionnaires which are answered in the patient's language. Right now, in our country, there is only one language ODI, Marathi language ODI score that has been validated. None of the other scores have been validated in like say Hindi or Gujarati. So we have only Marathi right now. Then last one is the analysis. Now, in analysis, you want to ask 3 questions. The first one is EG and CG same, both groups whether they are same, and if whether adjustment has been done if it is different. Second is was intention to treat analysis used. Now, this is an important concept to understand, where you are comparing the surgery group versus non-surgery group irrespective of what the patients actually did. Like if you have a crossover in the surgery group, that there are some patients who did not undergo surgery, those patients are still considered in the surgery group, correct? So in the non-operative group, even if somebody has had surgery, those patients are still considered in the non-operative group. And this is used to avoid bias, because you are doing randomization to make sure that both groups are same. If there is a crossover, that totally mixes things up. So that's intention to treat. And as treated means that the surgery group is compared with non-surgery group. So that is as treated. So you want to look for intention to treat analysis. And the last thing, as I said in the statistics talks, you want to make sure that the power of the study has been explained, and that is a priori power calculation. That means the power calculation was done before the start of the study, not at the end, to determine the sample size, and then they have explained the confidence limits and just not only p-values. So coming back to the 4 parts of EBM, that is ask, acquire, appraise and apply. The first is ask. So you ask a question either using PICO or PICOT, participants exposure comparison outcome and time. Once you have formulated the question, you acquire the data, like how Dr. Senthil said, using PubMed or whatever. That's you acquire using search terms, and these are the search terms that you are going to use. Then you will appraise using Rambo-Man, that paper, and determine what is this level of evidence. And then you will apply this particular information by making an evidence-based decision. Now, whenever you have a result or a conclusion of a study, when you apply, you have to take into consideration different things: patient values, preferences, clinical circumstances, your surgical expertise, your environment where you operate or work. So all these, the art of EBM is basically putting all these things together. So that's what apply means. And the last part is the audit. So once you have applied that information in your practice, you want to self-audit yourself and to make sure that whatever outcomes that you are getting from application of that particular information matches the information of the study. So that's the last part. That's an optional part, but that's very important. So that's the first part. Can I continue with the second? The paper, because I assume everybody has read the paper, and we are running late, so we can't kind of.
There's a paper in your file. I mean, I think most of them I've seen. Maybe we can give 2 minutes, just 2 or 3 minutes for them, in case they have not gone.
No? No, I'll explain. The paper is, let me go through the paper. You can take out the
Have
paper.
the delegates
outside.
gone through those before? Any of the delegates gone through it before? Because we have sent by email to a lot of people who are on the list.
But it
Registered
doesn't
delegates.
matter. I will give this presentation to Dr. Hitesh, and you can, review this again together, because, and also if you, Google GATE appraisal or Rod Jackson or Auckland University, you will find this material online. And I have learned this online. I have been doing it since my fellowship years, when we had journal clubs and we used to appraise, and this is how papers were discussed in journal clubs. So you'll find a lot of information online if you Google GATE for critical appraisal. So let's start with the paper. So this is basically a randomized trial, a very famous randomized trial called the sports trial. And basically it was surgical versus non-operative treatment for lumbar disc herniation. So when you are critically appraising any particular paper, you skip the abstract, skip the introduction, you don't need to read that, skip the conclusion. What is most important is the methods and the results. So start with that. So the first thing is the PCOT. You want to start with this chart and you want to hang this particular paper on this particular chart, right? So start with participants, the triangle. Now, if you see that this particular study was conducted in 13 multidisciplinary spine practices in United States. So that's your study setting. Now, these are all tertiary spine care centers, right? Now, eligible population was patients who had persistent symptoms of radiculopathy for at least 6 weeks, and they have not prescribed, specifically said what non-operative care. They have given percentages. So basically, these are the eligible population or the inclusion criteria. And this is pretty standard, nothing unusual things that they have written. SLR positive, corresponding neurological deficit, means patients with neurological deficits also were randomized. Most people had an MRI, they had a disc herniation, and if they have multiple disc herniations, they were included only if one discectomy was planned, even if the patient had multiple disc herniation. Now the reason why you want to know this is extremely important, because when you understand the outcomes of this study, you want to apply that into your practice. When you want to apply that into your practice to a patient who walks into your door, who has radiculopathy, that patient should fit into these criteria for this outcome to be valid for that patient. So this is very important to understand. Who does this apply to? So that's your inclusion criteria. And exclusion is previous lumbar surgery, Cauda-Equina syndrome, patients who had scoliosis, or all these are exclusions. So nothing unusual here, right? So now if you see that chart, all randomized trials will have such a flow chart. 2,720 patients screened for eligibility. 729 were ineligible because they were excluded. That leaves 1991 that were eligible. About 700 refused to refuse participation in the study. So 1,244 were enrolled. But the interesting part of this study here was a research nurse here gave an option to these patients to be either randomized or be part of a observational study, right? Now there is a problem, right? Now the patients have two different characteristics. You may say that patients who agreed to be randomized may have been psychologically risk takers, or it is possible that patients who refused to be randomized, wanted to be in an observational cohort, had more symptoms or more severe symptoms. They said, I am in a lot of pain, I don't want to be randomized, I want to be part of the study, I will choose what I want rather than being randomized. So here it creates a kind of a difference. So that's very interesting to know. So in the end you have 501 patients that are randomized. Now your intervention group, that is the E, exposure group or EG, had a standard open discectomy, that's what is explained here, with a midline incision and a fragmentectomy. So this is not an aggressive discectomy, this is just a fragmentectomy, that's usually what we do. Comparison group was a control group, and this was just the usual care. And they have listed what physical therapy, home exercise, NSAID and all. So again there is a problem here because this is not controlled. So that's a major flaw in this. Your control group does not have a very standardized way of treating them. It is just, they have just in quotes said usual care, right? The reason for this is that, say, if you think that physical therapy is more effective than NSAIDs for non-operative care, which you don't know because there is no evidence like that exists. If you think it is like that, then if in the control group some patients who receive more physical therapy than the others might be better off, correct? So that makes this particular group a little varied. So that's a flaw in this particular part of the A, but that's real life. So the advantage is that this is real life. You are comparing a real life situation. Coming to the box, which is O, that is outcomes. How were the outcomes measured? Outcomes were measured using SF36 and ODI, and there were a list of secondary outcome measures, work satisfaction, sciatica bothersome index, and etc. Now the important thing is that SF36 and ODI are all validated measures. They are not just random subjective assessments of pain. So that is important. So everything is good here, full marks here. Then last comes the T. What is the time frame? So the patients were reviewed at 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and 2 years. And you notice that there are 2 arrows. So you lose the horizontal arrow because this is not a cross-sectional study. This is a longitudinal study where the patients were prospectively followed. So that's your T. Now, then you come to this chart where they have done intention to treat analysis, where all these numbers are listed. How do you make sense of all this, right? So if you focus on the Oswestry disability group, you see the surgery is minus 26, or non-operative is minus 21 at 3 months period, right? So minus 26 means surgery group is doing little better than the non-operative group here, right? The bracket is basically standard error of mean. Treatment effect is very simple. Treatment effect means surgery minus non-operative treatment. So if you subtract minus 26 and minus 21, you will get minus 4.7. And in bracket is basically the 97 confidence interval. Now if you notice the 95% confidence, now understand what I said in the statistics talk. What does 95% confidence limit mean? That if you do this particular trial, the sports trial, 100 times, in 95% of the times, the values of ODI at 3 months are going to be in between these two values, right? And these two values are basically on one side of 0. If you notice at 1 year also, this is very close to 0, so let's assume that this is 0. Come to 1 year. Here you see that both these values are straddling a 0. 0 would be no treatment effect, right? If you subtract surgery from non-operative treatment, and if the treatment effect is 0, that means they're kind of both the same. So this is straddling the 0. So if you do this study 100 times, 95% of the times, either your value is going to be, your value is going to be in between this range, minus 7.8 or 1.3, correct? So some of the studies will show that it is better, surgery is better, and in some it will show that this non-operative treatment is better. So basically this particular thing means that both surgery and non-operative treatment had probably the same outcome. At 2 years also you see the same. So in this whole chart, if you see the confidence intervals, they are all one-sided, they are straddling the 0. Right, except for this secondary outcome measure, which is the sciatica bothersome index, where you see that the confidence limits are on one side of 0, favoring surgery. So if you see here minus 3.4 to minus 0.9, minus 2.9 to minus 0.4, minus 2.9 to minus 0.3. So all throughout, they are favoring surgery. That means that if you do this study 100 times, 95% of the times, sciatica bothersome index is going to be in favor of surgery. That's what it means, right? So you can hang these particular numbers on the gate frame like this. 501 patients randomized into these two groups. So you have 245 versus 246. You had certain patients that were lost to follow-up. You will see that in your first chart, right? So you are comparing 186 to 187 patients. Then your ODI at 2 years with a standard error of mean is this. Now standard error of mean is not exactly the same as standard deviation, but I can't explain that right now, otherwise it will take time. But here you are subtracting the surgery minus the non-surgery group, and you are getting a treatment effect. This is the same as risk difference, ego minus SIGO. You just subtract them, and this is the confidence limit, and the confidence limit is straddling a 0, so it means that there is no effect. Now, every particular time point you can hang on the frame like that. So whenever you are reading a paper, you just draw a small, this gate frame on the side of the paper and fill in these numbers, you will understand what is happening. Then come to the Rambo man. R is recruitment. Who are these findings applicable to? And are the participants representative of the target population? So as I said before, are these people more risk takers, or are the patients who are randomized who have lesser pain than the patients who opted for a observational cohort? So that's a question to ask. A is allocation, everything good here, a computer generated random. Thank you. A computer generated random sequence, that is very good. That's how it should be done. And proper allocation concealment was done. So full marks here for them, for A. M is maintenance, completeness of follow-up. Completeness of follow-up in each group is 86% and 73%, so it's kind of close to 80%. So we'll give them, the points here for being adequately, not much loss of data. Now, how did they treat missing data? That's also important. So missing data, there is no evidence of a differential dropout between the two groups, like I explained before, that, one group should not have more dropouts than the other. And the patients who dropped out are basically, their characteristics are that they are more likely to be married, they probably have more likely to be having disability compensation, they smoke, have more motor weakness, and lower baseline mental component. But the important thing here is that both the groups had similar characteristics for the patients who dropped out. That means that both groups are reasonably comparable. Then the second part in maintenance is the compliance. First is completeness of follow-up, second is compliance. In compliance, this is basically the problem of the sports trial, that's the crossover. You see that the patients who crossed over to surgery from the non-operative group were patients with lower income, worse baseline symptoms, more baseline disability, and were more likely to rate their symptoms as getting worse. Obviously, if you are assigned to the non-operative group and you have worse symptoms, you would want to jump over to the surgery group. And ethically, you cannot stop them from doing that. You can't force. Sir, problematic tended to cross over to the non-operative side even after being randomized to the surgery group, right? So what is the number of patients who crossed over? And this is the problem with the sports trial, a very high crossover rate. If you see the patients who are assigned to surgery, 40% of the patients who were assigned to surgery were, at the end of the study, were not operated. Whereas 45 patients assigned to the non-operative side were operated. So how much crossover is too much? I don't know what's the right answer to it, but 40% seems to be a very big number. B is blinding. Obviously, you can't blind such a study. You can't do a discectomy versus a sham discectomy, and there are ethical issues involved here. So these studies are not appropriate with such kind of a study design, and they have acknowledged, the authors have acknowledged here, that any improvement that may be seen with surgery may include some degree of placebo effect, because both the surgeon and both the patient knows that something was done for them, for their pain, versus patients who were on the non-operative side because they knew nothing was done for them, right? All good here, objective assessment. We have SF36 and ODI and everything, so they have full marks there. Last part is analysis. So 3 things in analysis: were EG and CG same at baseline? And if there is a randomization and you have done power analysis the correct way, both randomized groups are going to be similar at baseline, because that's the whole logic behind randomization. Now you will see this chart, that's usually the table 1 in all randomized trials, where you compare both groups. And if you can think of any of confounders other than the ones that they have listed, which they have not included, you may see that as a flaw of the study. But here this list is very comprehensive, right? I can't think of anything which they have missed. The second is, was intention to treat analysis used? And they have used intention to treat analysis. And they have also used as treated analysis because the crossover was so much, right? And the third point is power. So the power basically is, what they did is that they assumed a difference that they would find of 10 points at SF36 or ODI. And when they assumed that this study would find a 10% difference, they needed 250 patients in either group to detect this 10% difference. So see how they have done this. They have not done power study after the study has been done, but this is a priori power study. Have they used 95% confidence limits? They have. And I have explained this sciatica bothersome index again. You can see these charts. You can see those handlebars. Handlebars are overlapping everywhere. Even if surgery is, slightly better than non-operative treatment, still the handlebars are overlapping. So the p-values and, the conclusion is going to be that there is no difference except for sciatica bothersome index. It's not projecting well here. You can see in the paper that those handlebars are kind of not overlapping. So again, they did as treated analysis where they found that when you compare surgery versus no surgery, surgery did far better at all follow-up points throughout for all parameters. Obviously, because patients who were in the surgery group had more pain to begin with, whereas non-operative groups had less pain to begin with. So both groups at baseline are not comparable, but that's the real life situation. So a level 1 study is basically a high quality randomized trial. The conclusion of this slide is not all RCTs are level 1 studies. A level 1 study is a high quality randomized trial with a low confidence interval, narrow confidence interval. So this particular study, the disadvantage is it's not blinded, obviously. There's a lot of crossover. And so it is a lesser quality RCT. A lesser quality RCT is basically a level 2 study. And that's real life. This is how RCTs happen. And that's an inherent problem of doing an RCT. There is no, the authors did not do this intentionally. So conclusion, what to believe? Intention to treat analysis or as treated analysis? If you just skim through the paper and just read the conclusion, you would think that the surgery and non-operative treatment for disc herniation is the same, correct? But when you read the paper and analyze it this way, then you will realize that surgery is better than non-operative treatment in a certain subset of population. Those subset of population are patients who have worse symptoms, who cannot tolerate, basically exactly those criteria that crossed over from the non-operative side to the operative side. So those patients with surgery tend to do better. So when you are applying this into practice, you can't apply that, okay, sports studies said that there is no difference between surgery and no surgery, so this patient does not require surgery, you can wait for 2 years, you will be fine. It is not like that. So that's the interpretation of this study, and that's the end of my talk.